Good afternoon. This meeting of the Richmond Rent Board is beginning here at 5:01 p.m.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining the January 18th, 2023 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. I want to go over a few reminders before we begin. Members of the public were asked to submit requests to speak on any item on the agenda, including their name, phone number, and item for which they wish to make a public comment to Cynthia_Shaw at ci.richmond.ca.us by 3 p.m. today, as described on the first page of the agenda. If you wish to make a comment on any item on the agenda and have not emailed me your request, you must do so in accordance with the first page of the agenda before the item is called. Requests received via email during the meeting and after the deadline to submit comments will be accommodated as reasonably possible and will be limited to a maximum of 1 to 2 minutes, depending on the number of commenters, as more fully described in the Rent Board meeting agenda procedures. This meeting is being conducted as a Zoom webinar. Members of the public are considered attendees and will be muted for the duration of the meeting unless called upon during public comment and unmuted by the webinar host. The city cannot guarantee that its network and/or the site will be uninterrupted. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all statements made during this webinar will be on the public record. The first item on the agenda is the pledge to the flag. Everyone, please join me to pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge of allegiance
to the
flag
of the
United States of America,
to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call for Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Connor.
Present.
Board Member Johnson.
Present.
Board Member Vasilas.
Present.
Vice Chair Mashek.
Present.
Chair Finley.
present.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor.
Present.
Deputy Director Fred Tran.
Present.
General Counsel Charles Oshanuga.
Here.
And Staff Attorney Palomar Sanchez.
Present.
For the record, all board members and staff are present. The next item on the agenda is statement of conflict of interest. Are there any? Okay, hearing none. The next item on the agenda is agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Mr. Oshanuga, did you have a change to the agenda?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Chair Finley. Yes, I would like to move the last item, the item regarding the telecommunications, to be heard after the consent calendar.
Okay. Any other changes from staff?
No other changes.
Okay, give me just a moment to make a quick note here. All right, thank you. Any changes from board members? All right, very good. May we have a motion to make that change from Mr. Oshanuga? Okay, in that case, I will make a motion that we change the hearing of H2 from under Rent Board as a whole until the end of the consent calendar. Is that correct, Mr. Oshanuga?
Yes, to be heard after the consent calendar items.
Fine, after the consent calendar. May I have a second?
I second the motion.
Was that you, Ms. Johnson?
Ms.
No,
Michelle.
Ms. Mishik, I'm sorry.
No,
Thank
that's-
you. That was her second. May we have a vote, please?
Board Member Connor.
Yes.
Board Member Johnson.
Yes.
Board Member Vasilas.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mashek.
Yes.
And Chair Finley.
Yes.
The motion passes to move item H2 to be heard after the consent calendar before item G1. Pass unanimous. The next item on the agenda is public forum.
Do we have any speakers for public forum?
Yes, tonight we have 2 speakers. Each speaker shall be allowed up to 2 minutes to address the board. When your name is called, please wait until the webinar host lets you know that you have been unmuted. For the record, please state your name, and your residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. You will be muted when your time expires. The first speaker is Cordell Hindler, and let's see if he is on. Let me share my screen real fast. Okay, Fred, do you see him?
I put him in as a panelist.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yeah, so good evening, Chair Finley, board members. My name is Ellen and I'm a Richmond resident. So I only have one announcement. So you are cordially invited to attend the conference on February the 2nd at 6:30, hosted by Walnut Creek. I will send the information to Cynthia after when I speak. So, and I do like to make a request for me to speak after the consent calendar item has passed. One speak on H2 regarding the teleconference item. So that's it.
Okay, Cordell. And I'm sorry, but your phone was, I guess your device
Yes,
was
I
out.
want. Yes,
I heard that part. It's just it's the first part I didn't hear. It was the first, you invited them somewhere? Okay, just email me what you said.
Let's speak on H. Okay.
Yes, I received your request. I'm asking about the first part of your comment.
Okay.
You invited them somewhere and I couldn't hear you because your phone, your device faded out.
Oh, so the Contra Costa Mayor's Conference, Mayor's Conference is February the 2nd.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I will call your name when it's time for you to speak. Thank you. The next speaker is Ilana Clark.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Okay, so I would like to comment on last month's decision on case number RC21-T145. This last decision really contradicted the letter of the law per our own regulations. This was a fire, and this was stated in the hearing that the cause of the fire was as yet unknown, and it's still under investigation. So this is explicitly, a natural disaster is explicitly stated as an exclusion in the regulations. And this appellant was not asking for a ruling. They were asking for an appeal. The board's conclusion was to deny this because this non-English speaking family does not know the regulations any better than you all or the hearing examiner. I don't think that's particularly fair. Furthermore, I would ask that this board please give a care. These decisions that you make become legal precedent, and they affect more than just the appellant and the defendant that are before you. Thank you very much.
That was the last speaker.
All right.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is to approve the consent calendar.
Okay. Does anybody wish to remove any items from the consent calendar? Hearing none, may we have a motion, please?
I move that we adopt the consent calendar as is.
Thank you. May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. May we have a vote, please?
Sure. Board Member Connor,
Yes.
Board Member Johnson,
Yes.
Board Member Vassilos,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Sheck,
Yes.
and Chair Finley.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimous. Okay, the next item on the agenda is item H2 under Rent Board as a whole. Let me get there, sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, item H2 is to adopt a resolution making the required findings pursuant to Government Code Section 54953E3 and determining that as a result of the continued threat to public health and safety posed by the spread of COVID-19, city legislative bodies shall continue to meet via video conference and teleconference. There is one speaker on this item.
One speaker, thank you. May we have the staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Finley and members of the Rent Board. Good evening. Charles Oceanuga, General Counsel. There's no PowerPoint presentation. This is just an oral presentation. As you all are aware, I typically put this item on the consent calendar. I would have done the same this meeting, except I didn't want to have to pull it or have one of the Nick pull it so we can discuss it. I just wanted to give an update to you all and to the general public that the governor has indicated that he's going to end the state of emergency as of February 28th of this year. And just for some background, the state of emergency based on COVID allowed the governor to have certain emergency powers that he otherwise wouldn't have, as well as state officials and local officials. And one of those powers was to modify the Brown Act to allow for meetings to occur virtually much easier than usual. Typically, you could meet under the Brown Act, you could still meet virtually, but it's very difficult to do that. But given that Governor Newsom suspended a lot of these requirements, it made it a lot easier. Nonetheless, he's planning to repeal that or end the state of emergency, which would then remove his emergency powers and would undo many of the things he had done that were temporary. I'm currently researching the impact that it's going to have on the Brown Act, but I would imagine that it would reverse some of those changes, those temporary changes. And so if that's the case, I think we would be transitioning to either a hybrid meeting or a full-on in-person meeting. Currently, staff, myself, and Richmond Rent Program staff have been speaking with city officials to make sure we're in lockstep with the city because we use the same chambers and obviously we're in the same jurisdiction. And so the justifications for virtual meetings wouldn't necessarily be the same. We service nearly the same population. So anyways, that's just the update. Starting, if things don't change in terms of the governor, if he doesn't walk back what he said, I imagine that in March, we're going to have a different kind of meeting. So just to let you all know, one last thing that you should all know, Richmond, and I say this in the staff report, every time I publish it, I put the numbers in there, but Richmond has the highest numbers of COVID infections in Contra Costa County. And it's the third leading city in terms of deaths due to COVID-19. And so it's still a serious problem. Obviously, I'm sure we've all know people or maybe ourselves have been impacted by COVID, and it's a pretty serious virus. So we can still take things seriously, take the precautions we need to take. I think the city of Richmond, I think we still have this local emergency. I'm pretty sure we still have the local emergency, which allows us, the city and the city manager, to have powers she otherwise wouldn't have. And those powers include requiring staff to wear masks at work and all the other things that we've seen. So those things likely will not go away until our local emergency ends. But in terms of the Brown Act and in terms of virtual meetings, it's going to at the very least, I imagine it's going to be modified to a more hybrid kind of meeting. So that's all for my report. Thank you.
Thank you. At that point, do we need to take a vote saying that we've accepted your report, or is that sufficient?
That's sufficient. You don't have to take a vote.
Okay, all righty, very
Oh,
good.
oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, you do. I am sorry. Yes, because you have to adopt a resolution that allows us to continue this virtual meeting for February. So my apologies. So you would have to vote.
All righty. In that case, may we have one speaker on that item? Is that correct?
That's correct. It's
All right.
Bill Hindler.
May we hear the speaker?
Sure, Fred, you could go ahead and promote him back. I took him off for the moment.
He's back on.
Okay, hold on. Cordell, you can go ahead. Cordell? Cordell?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. You can go ahead.
So, yes. So, Chair Finley, board members, I am Cordell Handler and I'm a Richmond resident. So thank you, Charles, for that update. I do have some related to that. So yesterday evening, I attended the City of Pinole Council meeting, and from what their city clerk says, that they have suspended the seating, and so I'm thinking that if Pinole can, like, to continue like the hybrid format for like a month, okay, that's fine too. So I ask that the rent board should, like, follow the same, jurisdictions as other cities in West County, because I have attended other city council meetings in person or sometimes remotely. It depends on how I am around people. So I will go along with staff's recommendation, continue the hybrid format for another month, and then come March, give or take, hopefully that the rent board as well as staff will be able to come back into the chamber safe without a mask. That's along with that.
I believe he's done. That was the only speaker.
I'm
All
done.
right.
Oh, Cordell, you're done? Your phone faded out. Are you? Hello?
Yeah, I'm done. I'm
Okay.
done.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was the only speaker.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from board members, or hold on a moment, any additional comments from staff? Okay. Mr. Oshanuga, I'm going to ask if board members will be getting any kind of email updates on the status as this progresses.
Yeah, you should. We should definitely be keeping you all aware of the situation. And like I said, this is a fluid situation. The governor may change his mind. I don't know, but as is, that's the plan. And just to be clear, that this particular item is just to adopt the resolution so we can continue to meet virtually. But I just wanted to give you all an update that these things might change
If we need to. All right, great. And then, of course, as you said, it's not only the governor, but it's the state of emergency that's been called by the city manager for the city of Richmond, and we still have to accommodate whatever it is that those decisions are.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, very good. Mr. Traylor, did you want to add anything?
Certainly keep the board abreast of what's going on, and the only additional information I have is that I do know that the city council is there's discussion happening right now to have the city council move to a hybrid or in-person meeting schedule starting in March.
But that is still under discussion. No decision no decisions have been made.
There haven't been any decisions that I know of.
All righty. Now, did you have any questions or any comments that you wish to make on this item?
The only thing I'd like to say is, being that this may be the last month that we have remote meetings, I want to thank staff for quickly adapting to a new situation in the board, quickly adapting to a new situation. And it'll be great to see everybody in person again. But thank you for all the efforts over the last 2 years, continuing to hold our meetings remote.
And of course, our thanks to staff who have so nimbly adjusted to the ongoing issues. In that case, any comments from board members? May I have a motion, please? All right, in that case,
I'll make the motion, Chair.
Thank you.
That we adopt a resolution making the required findings pursuant to Government Code Section 5493953E3 and determine that as a result of the continued threat to public health and safety posed by the spread of COVID-19, our body can continue to meet via video conference and telecom.
Thank you, Ms. Connor. May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Vasilis. May we have a vote?
Yes, Board Member Connor,
Yes.
Board Member Johnson,
Yes.
Board Member Vasilos,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mashek,
Yes.
and Chair Finley.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimous. Okay, the next item on the agenda, we're moving now to item G1 under consideration of appeals. Item G1 is the appellant appeals a hearing examiner's decision that found that the respondent was entitled to relocation payments in the amount of $18,310.84 because appellant took an action to terminate respondent's tenancy based on a notice to withdraw appellant's property from the rental market. On appeal, appellant disagrees with many of the hearing examiner's characterization of the facts. The summation of appellant's appeal challenges whether the record contains substantial evidence to warrant the hearing examiner's decision that found respondent was entitled to relocation payments in the amount of $18,310.84. There are no public speakers on this item, and this item is a continuation from November 16th, 2022 meeting.
Okay, thank you. This evening, we are considering a landlord appeal to a hearing examiner's decision. For the record, please identify yourselves, state your name and your position to this case, and we will start with the appellant.
Hi, my name is Georgia Chambers. I am the homeowner, prior homeowner of 324 South 41st Street.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Chambers. Now, before we begin, let's go over a few appeal hearing procedures. First, the legal staff will give a summary of the case. Next, each party or their representative will have 7 minutes to address the board. The appellant starts first and will have 5 minutes to present his or her case on appeal. Next, the respondents will collectively be given 7 minutes to present their rebuttal. And finally, the appellant will be given 2 additional minutes to close. The board has the discretion to allow more time. Please note when the appellant or respondent is called, please wait until the webinar host lets you know that you have been unmuted. You will be muted when your time expires. As a reminder, this is not a de novo hearing. Therefore, no new evidence can be submitted. Anything that is said tonight should be based on the issues raised on appeal and exclusively on the record that was before the hearing examiner. Parties may discuss or comment upon legal matters in questions and any other pertinent issues raised by the appeal. The board must disregard any discussion or comment regarding factual matters that were not in the record before the hearing examiner or officially noticed in the hearing documents. After all parties have spoken, the board will discuss and then make a decision. Now, may we hear from legal staff, please?
Before we begin, I just want to make sure that all parties are here. So I see that Georgia Chambers is here. Can the is the respondent here?
Thelma Randalls is here. Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
Ms. Randalls, are you here?
Thelma Randalls is here and I'm her representative, Lauren Russo.
For Ms. Randalls.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Ms. Russo.
Thank you.
You can go ahead, Charles.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And again, good evening, members of the Rent Board, General Counsel Charles Oceanuga. This summary, it's going to be pretty short. I think this case was a pretty, in my opinion, straightforward case. There were a lot of facts. The hearing was long. I'm sure you all listened to the hearing recording, about two plus hours. A lot of facts were thrown around. But at the heart of this case was whether or not the landlord took an action to terminate the tenancy, and did that action obligate the landlord to pay relocation. And when we think about relocation, it just in lay people's terms, when we think about instances where an individual is entitled to relocation payments, we think about an instance where a landlord serves that individual with a notice of termination of tenancy for either an owner move-in, or for withdrawal from the rental market, or for substantial rehabilitation. There are some other instances, but those are the ones that really come to mind. And in this case, this is no different. The landlord served the tenant with the 90-day notice of termination of tenancy. So it's not enough days, but it's still an action. And in the notice of termination of tenancy, the landlord asserted that she intended to withdraw the subject property from the rental market. That alone obligates the landlord then to pay out relocation payments. And there was one notice served in December 4th of 2020. It was later rescinded March 16th of 2021. And then on March 17th of 2021, another notice, 90-day notice of termination of tenancy, was served for withdrawal on the tenant. That notice was never rescinded. And the appellant didn't offer any evidence either at the hearing or in the appeal to undermine that factual finding of the hearing examiner. And in fact, I'm sure you all listened to the appeal. The appellant's attorney, because the appellant was represented at the hearing by an attorney, the appellant's attorney admitted that that notice was never rescinded either. Now, the appellant makes one final argument, or at least makes an argument, that the tenant moved out prior to the expiration of her tenancy, and because she moved out prior to the expiration of her tenancy, she waived those rights to relocation payments. But of course, that's inconsistent with law, unsupported by law. A tenant does not have to remain in the home until the tenancy is officially terminated to be entitled to relocation payments. When the tenant moves out, that tenant's entitled to the relocation payments. That's a very broad overview of the facts. I'll let the parties get into their arguments, but that's I think for the board's purposes, that is the law, that the appellant did take an action. That action was to serve the respondent with the notice of tenancy of termination for withdrawal. And that notice was not rescinded as consistent. That notice was not rescinded at all. And even if there were an attempt to rescind, which there wasn't, but if there were, it would have to adhere to our regulations, and it did not. And because of those reasons, the hearing examiner's decision was correct. There's substantial evidence in the record to support the hearing examiner's decision to conclude that the respondent was entitled to relocation payments. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, do any board members have questions of legal staff? Okay. May we start, please, then with the first speaker? I believe that is the appellant. Or Ms. Ross or Ms. Russo, you would be representing the appellant in this case, is that?
No,
I'm sorry.
No,
The respondent, my apology. Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
Yes.
Let me
You'll
share
be
my
speaking
screen.
first.
Yeah, okay, Sheila will get 5 minutes to speak, so I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Chambers. You have 5 minutes to speak.
Hi, Again, my name is Georgia Chambers, and I am here for myself and my husband, Vincent Chambers. Good evening, board. I just wrote out what I needed to say. Okay. We argue that even though we did not write on the document decision of eviction on the 504B, that is what we intended with our actions. Our actions show that on July 20th, 2021, that Thelma and I agreed to rescind the termination agreement. This is evidenced by her signing of an agreement to extend termination for 1 full year. This signed agreement to extend termination date for 1 full year acted as a rescission of the termination notice that was sent on March 17, 2021, and an extension of our existing rental agreement. Thelma Randall moved out after this was signed, and which was a breach of existing rental agreement. Thelma was not coerced into moving out. As a matter of fact, we over communicated our decision to sell the property so that she can find other accommodations. We're very accommodating, Ms. Randall, despite the way this is characterized by Richmond Board memorandum. It was never my intention to coerce Ms. Randall from moving. The agreement was to extend termination that was signed on July 20th, 2021, is an implied rescission of our termination notice. Thelma stayed for an additional month after signing of the rescission, which I believe that she would be staying for the next year as agreed upon. Therefore, Thelma would owe 1 year's rent for violation of extension of the extension agreement. There is nothing in the ordinance indicating that the rescission was to be completed on a specific form. The rescission was signed by both of us on a Richmond Housing Authority rescind form to send Thelma and sent to Thelma's caseworker at Richmond Housing Voucher Program. It was my belief that this was to satisfy the rescission. At that point, since she would be staying, I submitted to Contra Costa County Housing a request to receive the appropriate rent for the size of the property in which it was granted by the Housing Authority. So my question is, why would housing grant an increase if they were not under the same assumption that she would be staying for an additional year as I was? Let me tell you about my relationship with Thelma. Thelma and I met when she came to, wanted to rent my property. She cried. There were others who opposed her moving in, but I allowed her to rent my 4-bedroom house with a 2-bedroom voucher. I only raised her rent 1 time during the entire time that she was there, which resulted in a loss of over $200,000 over the years that she had been there. Shortly after Thelma moved in, her car broke down. She came to me and borrowed half of her deposit so that she could buy a car, a new car, a Jaguar. I was driving a van. I gave her the house in excellent condition, new floors, planks, new appliances, washer, dryer, things in which she took from the property when she moved out. Anytime Thelma caused any damage to the property that she was responsible for, I had to fix. She would tell the inspector that it was damage caused by the owner who's living in Texas. But if I didn't fix it, it would not pass inspection. So to continue getting rent for the house, I had to take care of everything at my expense. The house was left damaged so bad that the estimate to restore it and put it on the market was $50,000, monies in which I did not have. So I had to sell it to an investor, which caused a loss of revenue in the sale of the property. At that point, I could not hold on to the property. There was no income and there was no need to restore the property for more than what I could afford. I did not receive any funds from the sale. In fact, I had to get an additional loan to meet the requirements for a 1031 exchange. I realized that there are homeless people in the city of Richmond, and that is trying to eliminate that problem, but on the backs of homeowners who can't afford to take care of their family and someone else's family. I just, I didn't feel that it was my responsibility. And her moving a mile and a half from where she originated, I don't think cost $18,000. She suffered nothing because she was on public housing. She'd had no losses at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cynthia?
So Ms. Randall's, she has her, let me share my screen so she can speak. Or, I'm sorry, Ms. Lauren, you'll be speaking for her. Okay, 1 second. Let me let me share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay, you have 7 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Good evening, members of the rent board. First and foremost, I just want to thank you for taking the time to determine the outcome of this matter. Next, I just want to say that the characterization of my client is just really not relevant to this issue at hand. And I also want to address one thing that the appellant stated about the termination notice. It was the July 20th termination notice was a termination notice extension. So it was just extending out her termination date. It wasn't necessarily granting her additional time to stay there. That's unlimited. Now, outside of that, the next thing I'd like to say is that we fully agree with the Richmond Rent Board's General Counsel's recommendation. As stated in General Counsel's recommendation, full review of the record demonstrates that substantial evidence did exist to corroborate the hearing examiner's findings that my client, Ms. Randalls, was entitled to relocation payments in the amount of $18,310.04. The respondent qualifies for those relocation payments as she was a tenant at the time of the service of the notice, service of both notices actually. And the appellant took several steps to terminate my client's tenancy, including service of 2 notices of termination, as well as never withdrawing that second notice of termination. My client was under the presumption that she did have to move, whether it was in a month or in a year. She knew that she had to move because, well, the appellant was essentially removing it from the rental market, even though her actual reasoning was because she wanted to sell the property. Now, the record reflects that the appellant's failure to comply with that rent board regulation have significantly and actually negatively impacted my client's life. She was forced to move from her home of 15 years with her 3 foster children. She was not provided any moving expenses, and in fact was actually given a check that bounced, and then she had to borrow money to pay for, and is still paying back that money. And she was ultimately forced to handle a very big move without any assistance. That is not what those regulations are there for, and this is exactly what it's meant to prevent. Overall, under the standard applied by the hearing examiner and general counsel, the notice served in March 2021 was never rescinded as required by the regulations, and respondent vacated the property in compliance with the notice that she was served. Thus, we believe that my client, Ms. Thelma Randalls, is entitled to the full relocation amount of $18,310.04. Thank you again for your time and consideration of this matter.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Yes, I'm here. 1 second. Now, Ms. Chambers, you can speak for additional 2 minutes. 1 second. 1 second, let me share my screen. Ms. Chambers?
Yes.
You can speak for additional 2 minutes to close.
Okay. Thank you again for hearing me out this evening. In regards to what Ms. Russo says, the reason why I had given Thelma a year is so that I can, because one would say that ignorance of the law is not an excuse, but I was ignorant of what the Ellis Act was and did not know of its existence until I was thrust into it. And the notice that gave her to rescind and to give her another year so that I can properly affect her move out, including raising the money to be able to pay her the relocation funds. But it is my belief that when we signed the rescission letter note to the housing authority, that was the agreement for her to stay at least another year in order for me to effectively complete the whole thing according to the Ellis Act. And Ms. Russo stated that she bounced a check. No, I actually put a stop payment on it because it was in my belief that when Thelma signed the rescission, that we would not be going forward with the move out. So therefore, I didn't find that there was a need for me to give her 1 month's rent, the amount of 1 month's rent, and she's going to be staying there. And so with her moving out, it did not give me the opportunity to properly, effectively complete the whole move out situation. So, but thank you again for listening to my appeal regarding this matter.
Thank you. Now, I believe that you said that there were no other speakers on this issue, on this item?
There's no public speakers on this item.
All right. Mr. Oshanuga, do you have any comments that you'd like to make at this point?
The only comment I would make is that the appellant continues to refer to the document as a rescission, this July document, and you all have the exhibits in front of you. And I believe it is the extension, I think it's Exhibit M, as in Mary. And that document, it's entitled Agreement to Extend Termination Date. So I'm not sure where this, rescission characterization is coming from, but that's the document. You can all look at it. Nothing beyond that, though.
Thank you. Are there any questions or statements from the board members? I'm not seeing any hands. Am I missing anybody?
I don't see any hands, but I hear some feedback. So I think Ms. Russo, I think is your mind muting. Okay, thank you. I don't see any hands.
All right. In that case, I will entertain a motion.
Chair Finley, if I
Yes.
could just comment, this is Board Member Grace Connor.
Of
I
course.
am troubled by the facts in this matter, and what is troubling me is the challenges that we continue to hear from property owners with the difficulty of complying with the law. And I'm hoping that we can continue to use these situations to help us find ways to provide similar types of assistance that's available to tenants through organizations like Ms. Russo's to property owners who find themselves in a legal quagmire. So I don't mean to pass any judgment on anyone, good, bad, or different. I just find that when we hear, this testimony from an owner who good, bad, or indifferent, relied on information from someone who didn't really understand the law, or that they didn't understand the law themselves, and now potentially find themselves subject to an $18,000 relocation requirement when they thought they were doing the right thing is just really frustrating, I'm sure, for our constituents. And I'm hoping we can use this as a springboard to find ways to provide additional support to people like Ms. Chambers.
And quite frankly, Ms. Connor, I share your concerns in a case like this where you've got the public agencies, you've got the rent board, you've got the Richmond municipal ordinance, and all three of them are coming together at one time. You may think that you're doing the right thing and be well-intentioned, but to get all of them on board and to understand that you're not quite done just because you've satisfied one doesn't mean that you've satisfied either of the other two. And I don't know how to solve that kind of a problem, but I acknowledge the fact that it's very difficult, especially for a landlord, to satisfy and get all the information that you need. And sometimes even the professionals don't understand that all three of the agencies are involved. That doesn't change the fact that that ordinance is in existence, but I can certainly understand how there's some confusion about it. Anyone else?
Chair Finley, Board Member Johnson has her hand up. Charles, Ms. Russo has her hand up. How do we do this? Are we gonna allow them to speak again?
It's up to the chair, but it's my understanding that the council's time and the party's time to speak has expired, so.
So Chair, it's up to you, but Ms. Russo has her hand up as well.
Ms. Johnson, and is somebody else besides Ms. Johnson have her hand up there?
Yes, the respondent's attorney, Lauren Russo, she has her hand up, and Charles said it's at your discretion.
No, what I.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Just to be clear, so the party's time to speak has already expired, and we have never afforded parties to speak after their expiration. So I mean, my advice would be that it's concluded, and so right now it's just the board speaking.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment that, I understand the whole process is frustrating for landlords, but I mean, it seems pretty cut and dry that this was not a rescinding of the 90-day notice, but it was an extension, but the respondents still have to move out. So there was no rescinding.
Yeah. All right, in that case, is any other comment? Would someone please offer a motion?
So, can you hear me now?
Who's speaking? I can, Ms. Johnson, are you speaking?
That was Ms. Johnson, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay, I move that we accept the hearing examiner's decision that the respondent is entitled to relocation payments in the amount of $18,310.84.
Thank you.
If I could, board member Johnson, rather than accept, you might want to use the word affirm, and you stated the incorrect amount. I think it's at 84 cents, and I think it's 4 cents. And I think
I apologize. Yeah. So yes, it says 84 cents, but I move that we affirm the hearing examiner's decision.
And please give it an amount as well.
Okay, yes, affirm the hearing examiner's decision that the respondent is entitled to relocation payments in the amount of $18,310, and mine says 84 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess that was an error.
I believe the correct figure is 4 cents.
4 cents.
Is that correct, Mr. Oshanuga? That's what I've got in my. Okay. Yes. 4 cents.
Yes.
May I have a second, please?
I second the motion.
Thank you, Ms. Mishik. May we have a vote, please?
Board Member Connor?
Yes.
Board Member Johnson?
Yes.
Board Member Vassilis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Mashek,
Yes.
and Chair Finley.
Yes,
Motion passes unanimous to affirm the hearing examiner's decision.
thank you.
To
Madam
the
Clerk.
sorry, to the parties, I would like to say this concludes the hearing for petition RC 21-T128. All parties will receive a decision on the appeal within 30 days.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Alrighty. Now we're moving on to item H1.
Yes.
Under Rent Board as a whole. Item H1 is to receive an update from the Executive Director, Nicholas Traylor, on Measure P being passed by voters on November 8th, 2022 ballot, and direct staff to draft amendments to Chapter 6 of the Rent Board regulations to be in alignment with Measure P. This item was continued from the December 21st, 2022 Rent Board meeting. There are no speakers on this item.
Okay, Chair Finley and members of the Rent Board, Nicholas Traylor, Executive Director. This should be a very short presentation, but it's important for the board and the public to know that as a result of the passage of Measure P, it necessitates some updating to our regulations. And it also, this is a presentation to just give a quick overview of what Measure P has done, the effect it's had on the rent ordinance. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of the statement of the issue, Richmond voters passed Measure P on November 8th, 2022 by ballot with a vote of 56%. Measure P amends the existing rent ordinance and the provisions of the Richmond Municipal Code, section 11.100.070B. The annual rent increase limitation for regulated units will decrease from 100% of inflation to 60% of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index, or known as CPI, or a flat 3%, whichever is less. The passage of Measure P necessitates the amendment of Chapter 6 Rent Board regulations that deal with and approve the annual general adjustment of maximum allowable rents. And there's no fiscal impact of receiving this report. Just a little bit of background. In Richmond, certain residential rental units, rental rates are controlled by Richmond's Fair Rent, Just Cause for Eviction, and Homeowner Protection Ordinance. As originally written and adopted by Richmond voters in November of 2016, landlords are entitled to an annual rent increase equivalent to 100% of the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers in the San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose region. And of course, that is essentially the inflationary rate, as reported and published by the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics for the 12-month period ending as of March of the current year. Prior to the passage of Measure P, the annual general adjustment for 2022 was 5.2%. Next slide. So what Measure P does is it caps rent increases for controlled rental units at 3% or 60% of the Consumer Price Index, whichever is lower. It requires landlords to decrease rent to the amount paid by the tenant on August 31st, 2022, plus 3%. And failure to lower the rent on the effective date of Measure P will likely result in a rent overcharge. Measure P has a phase-in period, which extends from the effective date of Measure P through August 31st of 2023. Measure P will become effective, it has already become effective, 10 days after the vote is declared by the City Council. And that was done at the December 20th, 2022 regular City Council meeting. In terms of required action by the Rent Board, the passage of Measure P necessitates amending Chapter 6 of the Rent Board regulations, specifically Regulation 600 and 610 of Rent Board regulations. They must be amended to clarify that the annual general adjustment is now based on 60% of CPI or 3%, whichever is less, among other necessary clarifications related to Chapter 6 regulations. So the recommended action is to receive an update from the Executive Director on Measure P, having been passed by voters on November 8th, 2022 by ballot, and direct staff to draft amendments to Chapter 6 of Rent Board regulations to be in alignment with Measure P. And with that, staff is happy to answer any questions from the board.
Any questions for Mr. Traylor? Yes, Ms. Connor.
Look at you. You saw my hand. I love it. I did have a question. I'm curious if there's going to be some interplay around the MNOI petitions with this Measure P, the impact of Measure P. Because my concern is that the basis for those regulations really relied on the fair return for an owner, and when the ability to increase rent is potentially significantly less than the ongoing prevailing CPI, that MNOI is going to be impacted as well.
Thank you, Board Member Grace Connor. That, to my understanding, there will be an interplay and an impact. I would defer to Charles to answer this question, since it is more of a legal question. So I'll let Charles.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So just generally how MNOI works is you compare your base, your net operating income in your base year to your current year, right? And the time that has passed in between your base year and your current year, you use the inflation, the resulting inflation, to adjust your base year net operating income. So it's your actual dollars to dollars, right? So that's not going to change. You're not going to then, we're not going to use some kind of capped version of inflation. We're going to use actual inflation measured from certain periods of times. So the legal impact, or the legal impact on our regulations would likely be none. The regulations would not change. They are already consistent. They are what they are. You use 100% of what the inflation was during those times. The practical impact could be, depending on people's base year net operating income, could be significant, in terms of a landlord's ability to get a rent increase. And by significant, I mean, I suppose in a positive way for landlords, they may be more entitled to additional rent increases, depending on what their base net operating income is. So base year net operating income.
Thank you for that. I had a follow-up question, if I'm not cutting you off.
Excuse me?
I said I had a follow-up question. I just wanted to be sure I wasn't cutting you off.
Oh, yes, I'm finished. Go ahead.
Okay. So how does that then interplay with your ability to get that is the MNOI, if that increase is granted, it doesn't have any impact on your ability to do banking, those other kinds of rent increases. So my thought was, with Measure P, you're going to be capped at no more than 8% in your banking, your ability to bank uncaptured rent increases because of the way 600 is written. But for the MNOI, if I have an increase, I can take it all at one time. So even if it exceeds the cap under the banking system, let's assume it's a 15% increase that is awarded. Can I get it all at once?
It's a good question. So just before Measure P, the MNOI rent increase allowance was different from the banking rent increase, just generally, right? You could take, if you were entitled to an MNOI rent increase, it could exceed whatever limitations were on the banking rent increase. And so those two things, Measure P didn't touch either of those two things. So I'm imagining those two things are still static, how they are. In terms of the rent board wanting to cap an MNOI rent increase to bring it more into line with the voters' intent of Measure P, the rent board can certainly do that. That's a power given to you by the voters before Measure P. That's part of the rent, or the reason you're able to cap MNOI rent increases isn't because you just made up some regulation, because you all know you can't do that. Regulations aren't law. It's because the law itself, the rent ordinance itself, gives you that power to cap MNOI rent increases. So they won't, be too shocking to tenants. So it could be revisited in the future if the rent board wants to lower the allowable percentage you can take year over year. But as it stands, and Measure P does not impact that particular allowance.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Connor, is that sufficient?
More than.
Okay, thank you. Let me quickly adjust this for a second and see if I don't see any other hands. Am I missing anybody? Okay, all right. Now, Mr. Traylor, you've explained this to us. We have received the update. Do you need a motion about that receipt of the update?
I believe we do need a motion, correct, Charles? Because we're going to be, we'll be directed to draft amendments to our annual.
Okay.
Yes, but before you make a motion, may I just say one last thing, Chair Finley?
Of course.
Just to make sure I was clear on Board Member Connor's question. The cap on the MNOI is tied to I have to look at it again, but I thought it was tied to your AGAs. So if it is tied to your AGAs, then yes, the cap necessarily would decrease depending on the AGA, right? I think at the max, like you were saying, Board Member Connor, would be 8% at the max. That cap, but everything else I said still stands. That cap can be increased if the board wants to increase it, or it could be decreased, or it could stay the same. I hope that clarifies it. I'm sorry if I misstated previously.
Okay. Ms. Connors, did that clarify for you? Do you need anything else from Mr. Oshanuga?
No, he and I were going to talk later.
Okay, all right, that's legitimate. Mr. Vasilis, I saw your hand up a couple of moments ago. Did you have a question?
I was just going to comment on, I thought the increase, allowable MNOI increase was not tied to any AGA. It was just a set max allowable amount.
If you give me a second, I
believe it's 50%.
Okay, I'll just pull up the regs right now to make sure that I can just give me 1 sec. Okay, thank you, Board Member Vassilas. You're correct. It's the regulation states, notwithstanding any other provisions of this regulation, the implementation of a MAR increase shall be limited to each year to 15% of the MAR on the date the petition is filed. And then it goes on to say other things. So that is not changed by Measure P. That stands.
Okay. Mr. Vasilis, are you comfortable now with where we stand?
Yeah,
Okay, let me just, I'm sorry to keep bouncing back and forth, but I don't have everybody on the screen at the same time. So it appears to me that I have no more folks that wish to discuss this issue. Is that correct? Cynthia, can you see everybody?
I see everyone. I don't see any hands.
Okay, all right. In that case, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the presentation.
And do you wish to direct staff to draft amendments to Chapter 6 of the Rent Board regulations to be in alignment with Measure P?
I do. Thank you so much, Chair. I move that we accept the presentation and direct staff to draft amendments to Chapter 6 of Rent Board regulations to be in alignment with Measure P. Thank you so much.
I thank you. May we have a second, please?
I'll second.
Ms. Johnson, was that you?
Yes,
Yeah.
that was Board Member Johnson.
Okay, thank you. May we have a vote, please?
Yes, Board Member Connor
Yes.
and Board Member Johnson,
Yes.
Board Member Vasilis,
yes.
Vice Chair Mashek,
Yes.
and Chair Finley.
Yes,
Motion passes unanimous.
thank you.
The next item on the agenda is reports of officers.
Okay, Chair Finley, members of the Rent Board, I have a couple of announcements. The first is that on January 27th, we're going to be publishing our next workshop. We've changed things up a little bit this year. We're going to be holding more what we are terming micro workshops to focus on some of the commonly asked questions from landlords and tenants. So this one is going to be on how to submit rent increase notices with the rent program in compliance with the rent ordinance. I also want to this is very important, remind board members that if they're interested in continuing to serve on the board, they will need to let the staff know that they are interested in continuing to serve because as of, I believe, March 12th, but at the beginning of March, board member terms are expiring. And so board members will need to let staff know, and eventually I believe the city clerk needs to know as well, and you'll need to reapply if you're interested in continuing to serve. And then finally, I want to congratulate Vice Chair Mishek. Vice Chair Mishek was recently appointed as the Chief of Staff for the newly elected Mayor Eduardo Martinez. And congrats to you, Shiva, for that. I know you'll have a great impact on what happens here in the city of Richmond. So those are my announcements.
We thank you very much. Remember too that depending upon how many people decide to come back or not come back, that will start to influence the planning for future agenda items in order to bring everybody up to the same level as quickly as possible, let alone the ethics and the other courses that we have to take. So your participation in this will be greatly appreciated. And at that happy moment, are we ready to adjourn the meeting? This meeting is adjourned at 6:11 p.m. Thank you so very much.
Very good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
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 Night.